All right, guys, my name is Sarah Bachman, and I'm presenting my project, which is titled Behavior Interventions Autism Spectrum Disorder Students Who Display Aggressive/Problematic Behaviors in School. My dedications and acknowledgments has to go out to my family, friends, and master teacher from student teaching. Um, Without my sister, I would have had nobody to edit my paper because I didn't have a peer reviewer. And then my husband for all those days that he just had to take off with the kids so I can write this paper. And last but not least, my master teacher from clinical practice. Without her, I wouldn't even have a study. She's the reason why I have any data at all. And she encouraged me to keep going. My abstract is super long. This isn't even all of it, so I'm going to try to make it brief without reading it. Uh, my original study was about discovering what teachers needed and paraeducators to what they needed to work with kids with autism that were aggressive or had problematic behaviors in the classroom. And so after my literature review, my study kind of changed. I discovered certain elements that were proven through other research to work in the modification of problematic behaviors. And these elements were functional behavior assessment and the training that the individuals had in that, the intervention being in a natural environment, parent involvement, and then parent actually intervention training and to what degree they needed that, and also teacher intervention training. And what I found through the literature review is that these elements helped in the success of the modification of that behavior. So I went out and I did teacher and paraeducator interviews and questionnaires in a Riverside Unified School District for grades K through 6th. I sent out about 100 questionnaires and I only had 14 come back. So I also tried to get parents involved in this study, however, none were willing to participate. After I collected the data from the questionnaires and interviews, I had a lot of limitations. I had only information on parents from the teachers and paraeducators. I had no data as to where the interventions were natural environments or not. Like they were always done in the classroom. There were no outside programs utilized. And then the functional behavior assessments are done by the school psychologist. So the teachers don't even do it in their district. So basically, this study was very limited. I'd have to go back and add much more data for the validity and reliability of it to be higher. But Riverside Unified School District could use the information from this study because I discovered things that teachers weren't very confident in creating and implementing behavior interventions, and neither were their teachers' aides. Chapter 1. I'll try to make this as brief as I can. I'm not going to read the slides, but you can always pause it if you feel like reading it. So in Chapter 1, I introduced this study by stating that there's a lot of more children with autism being diagnosed each year. And sometimes ASD students may revert to aggression and frustration when triggered by activities around the school environment. And teachers are not prepared on how to handle this, or not always prepared. So the topic was in the beginning that there were many programs and interventions out there that these teachers could try to figure out. But there wasn't a lot of research as to which ones would work for their student. And later on, we discovered that it has to be tailored specifically to the student. That's why these interventions weren't necessarily working. That also goes along with the problem, the statement of the problem. And the purpose was to provide parents, families, and teachers, paraeducators, and school administrators with information and knowledge of different successful evidence-based strategies and interventions to help their child. And my original hypothesis Teachers and school personnel who have training in behavior interventions and who have experience with working with students who have autism spectrum disorder will have a higher behavior modification rate than those that are limited in training and experience. Chapter 2. I already gave some background, which is, the number of autism students in classroom settings is on the rise. My interest in this study began when I started working in the education field. 2 different jobs. One was at a private company called ABC Consultants, which they basically worked with children with autism who had problematic behaviors, and they taught me how to do behavior intervention plans and how to work with them. And then the other job was when I was just a teacher's aide, and I worked with a child that was emotionally disturbed, and I was also doing behavior interventions with her, but my teacher and I were lost. We did not know how to help this child, and they sent in a behavior specialist from a private company to teach us how to work with the child and help us develop a behavior intervention plan. Review of the literature. My literature review was very long. Basically, I discovered those elements in the successful modification of behavior, which were the functional behavior assessments and training that the implementer would have. The type of environment needs to be natural. Parent involvement is needed, and then intervention training for the parent is needed. And then the teachers also need to have intervention training specifically to that child. This quote that I left on here I really like. It says, if basic elements of effective programming are not incorporated into interventions and treatments and programs are not based on objectively verified effective methods, children and youth with autism spectrum disorder will fail to achieve outcomes that fully reflect their capabilities. Key terms. Functional behavior assessment is generally considered a problem-solving process for addressing student problem behavior. It relies on a variety of techniques and strategies to identify the purposes of specific behavior and to help IEP teams select interventions to directly address the problem. Behavior intervention plan is a document that describes just how the IEP team will help the child improve his or her behavior. Intervention environment, setting where the intervention takes place. And then to summarize what my literature review discovered, besides those elements, there were gaps. And the gaps were to what degree interventions are actually implemented in the classroom, or degree I meant with the elements that were discovered. Are they being implemented? Are they not? How do they implement them? Are they trained in implementing them? What role and involvement do parents have? What variables promote generalization and maintenance of learned skills? How often are these key elements actually addressed to ensure interventions are performed to their fullest potential? The study in the current field needs to cover larger groups and more diversity in order to overcome bias in research. So all these studies that I found, yes, they show that these elements were successful, but they were very small study groups. So we need to find a larger group to study. Study design. By accessing both special education teachers and paraeducators in the city of Riverside, California, this study will attempt to discover the practices and interventions used by teachers with regard to aggressive, problematic behaviors in school. The populations in sampling came from elementary schools in Riverside Unified School District, K through 12 classes. The candidates must have had experience working with an ASD student or students who demonstrated aggressive, problematic behaviors in the classroom setting. 100 questionnaires were sent out to paraeducators and teachers from this school district, and this group was sampled to represent other Southern California schools. Here is the actual participants from my study. They all were in the special education field. I did send them out to general education teachers because it is possible for this type of student to be in their class, but none were returned. The setting took place during teachers' contract hours, before school, after school, and during lunch. The majority of my participants were from Victoria Elementary School. And then the others that were sent by email or district mail were throughout the school district, and I talked to them through email and by phone. My planned activity was the teacher and paraeducator questionnaires, and then after they completed these questionnaires, I went around and interviewed each individual. The methods of data collection were cross-referencing charts and bar graphs. The validity and reliability of this study was based on comparing the participants' questionnaire and interview responses, and then I actually compared the teachers and the paraeducators' responses against each other, which there were some interesting finds from that. The assumption was that it was hypothesized, I'm going to get it right eventually, that teachers or personnel who utilize the elements, functional behavior assessment, and had higher training, a natural intervention environment, parent involvement, and then parent training in the intervention, teacher intervention training would have a higher success rate of behavior modification in the school setting. Some limitations I had was it was a very small sample group. I had no parent participants, and I had no comparison data of a different school district. The interviews and questionnaires could also be considered limited because they were based on the participants answering honestly and without bias. Chapter 4, here's how I began my analysis. I was basically lost until I started using bar graphs to compare to. And after I had everything graphed, I went back and I found percentages of answers my participants would answer. Here's the teacher behavior intervention questionnaire that was graphed on the other slide. This is the paraeducator questionnaire responses. And here are their questions. I didn't put my interview graphs up there because the slide was, or my PowerPoint was already too long. But here are some of my findings. I kind of categorized them. This was functional behavior assessments and training. 12% of teachers felt that behavior interventions were needed in order for a behavior intervention to be successful. That was very low. That was on the from the questionnaire. When asked in person, they all said that they were needed for it to be successful. This is a quote: "The school psychologist conducts all functional behavior assessments in our district." And then 75% of teachers follow that guideline. They do not conduct them. If an FBA is conducted, which is rare, all teachers report the findings to the students' parents. 62% of teachers from this study have had formal training in functional behavior assessments. Only 25% received additional training through their school district. When teachers were asked on the questionnaire whether FBAs are useful or not, 100% said yes. All the teachers' aides that were interviewed stated that they did not know what a functional behavior assessment was. So even though they were answering questions about it on the questionnaire, they didn't know what that was. After I explained to them during the interview what a functional behavior assessment was, 75% of the teachers' aides stated that functional behavior assessments are not used in their classroom. Other findings related to behavior interventions and training. 62% of teachers stated that they received behavior intervention training through their credential program. 75% of teachers trained their classroom aides on how to implement a student's behavior intervention. 63% of paraeducator participants from the study stated that they had no formal training in implementing behavior interventions. All participants, both teacher and paraeducator, stated that more training in implementing behavior interventions was necessary for a behavior intervention plan to be successful. When asked to all participants if it was necessary for a behavior intervention to be implemented in a natural working environment, 92% marked yes. All participants stated that interventions happened in the school setting. There are no outside programs that come in during the intervention process. 62% of teachers said that no outside programs are involved in the intervention process. Findings related to parent involvement in training. All information on parents was gathered from teachers and paraeducator participants. So I don't have the parent side of this information, unfortunately. 75% of the teacher participants stated that they do provide parents with support and resources during the intervention process of their child. The majority of paraeducators from the study were unaware of whether or not parents are provided with support or resources to help their child, so they don't know if what the teacher is saying is true. Then 92% of participants were unaware if parents received any type of behavior intertraining at all, like went out and did it on their own. All participants stated that parent involvement in behavior intervention training is needed in order for the student behavior intervention to be successful. So no one knows if parents are getting training, but they all agreed that they need to, and that because they need to be involved in order for the intervention to be successful. So results from this study remain unclear as to whether the implementation of functional behavior assessments were properly done and that the information gathered from it is accurate. This is due to the school psychologists implementing all functional behavior assessments in the school district. And then from what during the interview process, they explained that they only come in for one day and observe the student. And then they gather the rest of their information from the teacher themselves. So that doesn't sound, well, that is not a very accurate way to assess a student's behavior. Teachers and paraeducators did not see correlations between natural and unnatural environments in the success rate of behavior interventions because they all happen in the school environment. There is no variations. There are no outside programs utilized in this school district. Parents are often referred to the Inland Regional Center for Behavior Intervention Training and Support, but no one is aware whether or not that they're actually going. Paraeducators are trained by the teacher who planned the intervention and how to implement it. And both teachers and paraeducators stated once again that training in behavior interventions and parent involvement are the keys to successful interventions. Chapter 5, Discussion and Results. So my original hypothesis was to discover what interventions were needed, but after the analysis of current literature, that changed because of the discovered elements that I found through research. I found that functional and behavior assessments are necessary to even create a behavior intervention plan. And then once that behavior intervention plan was created, the paraeducator and teacher need to have training. They also need to have training in, the teacher does, or whoever implements the functional behavior assessment needs training as well as how to do it. You can't just do it. Through the literature review, the best environment is a natural one that was discovered. Some school districts have a private company come in and the child goes there a certain time or after school and they learn the intervention there. And that's not always successful because that's not in the school setting where the problem is happening. Parent education and training of interventions was discovered as necessary, and then teachers' education in autism spectrum disorders and intervention, implementation, and planning was necessary. So the new hypothesis and purpose of this study was discovered, well, what degree are teachers actually using these elements? I found that when I was a teacher's aide that they weren't being utilized, at least not the functional behavior assessment. We made a behavior intervention plan, but that was just based on what we thought was happening. Insights. The majority of data collected say that both teachers and paraeducators find functional behavior assessments useful when interviewed. 75% of teachers that filled out surveys said that they had functional behavior assessment training in graduate school. But when interviewed, say that they could use additional training if required to do so in the future for their school district because they're rusty. The majority of teachers and paraeducators lacked confidence in implementing and planning behavior interventions. They are kind of guessing when they're doing it. 62% of teacher participants have formal training in different kinds of behavior interventions. 66% of paraeducators have no training in implementing behavior interventions. 83% of paraeducators were informally trained on how to implement a behavior intervention by their classroom teachers. However, 38% of paraeducators are being informally trained by teachers that have no formal training in behavior interventions themselves. Remember, only 62% of the teachers that from this study actually have training. That means the other percentage didn't in their training paraeducators on how to do something that they don't even know how to do. 100% of participants stated that more behavior intervention training for teachers, paraeducators, and parents is needed in order for behavior interventions to be successful. Ethical issues and applications. Some issues from this study were I did not discover whether it was important to have interventions implemented in a natural environment because it was just the same environment. There was nothing to compare it to. Another issue was there were no variations in the schools. They were all from the same school district. And then there was lack of parent participants. All information about parents were from teachers and teachers' aides. Applications. Riverside Unified School District can use this information from this study to gain knowledge as to how teachers and paraeducators modify problematic behaviors of autism spectrum disorder students in their classroom. And they can gain information as to what they need to improve the modification of students' behavior. Another possible recommendation that I would make to the school district would be to hire a school psychologist specifically for doing functional behavior assessments so they're more available to have more time to do the FBA, or they should train teachers on how to do them because they're not being used. Functional behavior assessments are rare because school psychologists are busy, and then they're not even doing them properly because they're not there. They're only there for a few hours on one day. Once again, here are some limitations. All participants for one school district, school psychologists performed all functional behavior assessments within the school district. They are limited due to the lack of availability of the school psychologist to assess the student's behavior. There were no parent participants, and then the study itself lacked participants. Out of 100 questionnaires sent out to teachers and paraeducators, only 14 were returned. The next steps of inquiry. I'd open up the study to other school districts in Southern California so we can see if there's a pattern among these school districts. I would add observations of functional behavior assessments, behavior interventions, and planning in the future to check the reliability of the teacher and paraeducators' interviews and questionnaires. And then I would definitely try to find parent participants so I can gather more information as to their involvement and their possible knowledge in behavior interventions. When I look back on this study, there's so many changes I'd make. I would start off with the hypothesis that I ended with, since I had to modify my study after my literature review. I'd gather more data. I'd give myself more time to gather data. But I really do believe that this study could fill in some gaps. if I expand and um, get it more information. I'm pretty proud of myself that I actually did this. I never thought from the start that I'd be able to do it. Um, my study did not answer a lot of the questions that I was seeking, but if I choose to pursue this further in the future, I know what to do to answer those questions. So, yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.